above, so below. Feel the pain in my soul, the red pill dissolved. Organized, no matter the cost. Politicians start wars, they don't fight, they sit in the poor. And nothing lasts forever as long as we stay together. Give hell to the masses, watch the unity rapture. This is for the kids and the culture. It's one love, one growth, one light, light warriors. Hello, everybody out there in the podcast world. Today is another very special episode that I have for everyone. I gotta say, it's an absolutely pleasure to have this comrade and talk with him again, Peter Goselin. Peter Goselin is one of the most dopest people on the planet, and it's always great to see you.
Hey, it's always great to have a chance to see you as well. I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time out in your busy schedule to talk about things that are going on in the world and stuff like that, and to give a great political insight on exactly how we should look at things, especially how Western media try to betray it with choosing sides and doubling down when they know they're wrong and all this stuff. There's nothing wrong with a little nuance, isn't there? Nothing wrong with that. I hate the notifications. I hope they don't come up in the recording. So I apologize to whoever heard that notification. Peter, how have you been, bro? How are things?
Well, like everybody else, we're surviving the pandemic, right? I mean, I can say it's wonderful. It's not wonderful. It's we're still struggling along.
Yes. I've got into a little trouble. I did a little interview with a doctor who ended up not being who he says he was. He lost his license and stuff, and we talked about COVID. There was a few things that I've agreed with that I felt were factual, and there was a lot of other things that I didn't agree with that I felt like that wasn't factual. So it's a breath of fresh air to get somebody on here that is actually like legit who they are. And with that, I was, COVID. This is an episode that's probably gonna get demonetized. So whoever watches this, I really, really, really appreciate this. Our episode last time got demonetized. I forgot to tell you that, Peter, because we were talking about Ned Lamont and William Tong. So I guess the DNC algorithm was like, "Oh no, suppress this video, this video."
Yeah, funny how that works, isn't it?
Right, and it literally left me a notice though saying, "No, you cannot have this content on because you're talking about political figures and stuff like that." I'm like, well, screw that. I do what I want.
Well, it's like back in the 80s, like the Clash said, you have the right to free speech, you just don't have the right to use it.
Right, exactly. Have you been noticing what's going on and how they're punishing the workers? Like,
oh man,
especially the healthcare workers right now.
Yeah. It's really interesting how this story is developing, right? Because on the one hand, just a few months ago, the story was nobody wants to go back to work. Everybody's lazy because they're living on unemployment benefits. If only we hadn't given all those federal unemployment benefits to people because of COVID, the restaurants would be open and everybody would be having a good time. And then the story developed a little bit. It began to be, hey, you know what? It turns out that even when you stop those unemployment benefits, there's still a shortage of workers who are willing to work for really crappy wages. And now it's turning out that this is starting to manifest as more and more people resisting these, working under these bad conditions. That there's been more labor strikes and labor actions this year than in, probably the last decade. And at the same time, a lot of informal resistance, right? Not just places where people are organized in unions, but people are walking off the job, people are quitting their jobs, and they're fighting back against the bad conditions. But at the same time, this one story that I think is not getting covered at all. I mean, it's notable when there are strikes going on and, the liberal media starts actually talking about the fact that there are strikes going on. That's pretty notable. But the one thing that they're not talking about is this, that in the background, while you have certain employers in certain sectors, like the service sectors, for example, talking about there being a labor shortage and they can't hire enough help. At the same time, in a lot of, there are definitely sectors in which the employers are using the pandemic and the circumstances around the pandemic to get rid of people who they consider to be problematic.
Mm.
And by that, I mean, certainly people who are complaining about their working conditions are trying to organize, but also older workers, workers with long-term disabilities, pregnant workers, people who have workers' compensation injuries. I'm getting calls every single day from people who have worked for their employer, sometimes for years, and always, turned in a good week of work every week and earned their paycheck, and who suddenly find themselves out on the street with no recourse. And it's just a matter of like, you know what, the boss has decided that they don't care to have people who might need to have medical attention at some point in time, or might need some kind of a special accommodation because of their disability, or might have to take time off to have a baby.
Right.
They're looking to purge as many of these folks out of the workforce as they can.
Jesus Christ. Wow. And and what will strike me is how you said that how you're seeing a lot of call to actions with striking and working relations rallies that are going on right now, which has been a spike from the last 10 years. Um,
Definitely.
do you have any highlights for my audience of like who to look at, which campaigns to pay attention to, um, here in Connecticut or anywhere else in the United States that comes to mind?
Yeah, well, the Kellogg's workers are on strike. That's a big deal.
Hmm.
That's still going on. The John Deere tractor, major manufacturer, is still located in the United States. They just went out. Um, I was just reading this morning, not a strike, but University of Pittsburgh.
Mm.
University of Pittsburgh just had a union election. The union faculty voted 75% in support of organizing a union. They've been trying to organize a union in the faculty, among the faculty at the University of Pittsburgh, for like decades. And this was the year. There were something like, I want to say that the vote was something like in the neighborhood of like 1,500 to 500, something like that. It was very, very strongly pro union, and it's a good size. It's a big bargaining unit. So it's a seriously large unit, and a big accomplishment. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing some big strikes. We're definitely seeing other forms of resistance. We're definitely seeing people organizing unions and other kinds of, not just traditional unions, but also other kinds of more informal resistance. It's a big shift. It's a big shift from where we've been for the last 10 years, but big shift from where we've been for the last 40 years, really.
Right. And especially in a time and age where the unions don't really have as much power as they used to back in the day. It's given a real reason to start unionizing again. And I'm always for unionizing. This sounds like a really good idea.
Hey, General Dollar, right? Now, General Dollar, one of the dollar store chains, that actually over the last couple of years has sucked up some of the other dollar store chains. The workers at General Dollar up in upstate New York organized the first union at a General Dollar store.
Wow.
That's a significant movement. Dollar stores, I mean, this. These places very often are in low income communities, both in oppressed communities as well as like rural, semi-rural white communities.
Right.
Their customer base are working class folks who don't have the money to go to Costco or Target for a lot of things. Being able to get things at a low price is really paramount.
Right.
And General Dollar is making millions and millions of dollars from this customer base.
Mhm.
And it's not exactly the first place you'd expect to be people to be organizing a union, but it's a really
Right.
good indicator of the time that we're in,
Right. Right.
that these folks who are really like low wage service workers, cashiers, people stocking shelves, people unloading, unloading trucks on the docks in the back. The fact that they've decided that they want to unionize is a pretty significant measure of the times, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. A dollar store. Wow. That's unheard of.
Yeah, it
Usually
is. It is.
you think about like big corporations that are like, I don't know, say Google, or what's going on with Amazon, the certain regions of Amazon, but a dollar store. Wow. That's awesome. The fact they were able to pull that off. Now,
Yeah,
so is
absolutely.
this like one store, or is it like a region?
No, it's just one store. It's
Okay,
just one
nice.
store, but it's
A
but it's
snowball.
yeah, I believe it will. I believe it will. Oh, and then of course the other thing, I don't want to forget about this, but the other big story, folks have been hearing a lot about shortages lately,
Yeah.
and they're aware of the fact that the way they describe it in the business publications is like a supply chain shortage,
Mm,
which basically means um, that they don't have enough. Really, what it means is they don't have enough truckers to unload ships in the major ports in the United States and put them on trucks and get the goods distributed across the country.
mm,
And one of the biggest ports, of course, is Los Angeles. There's something like 13,000 truck drivers that that pick up loads from the port of Los Angeles every week, and a big group of workers, their big group of truck drivers, they just settled a wage and hour lawsuit. Essentially, uh, these are the folks who people often think of as being owner operators or independent contractors, and more as the big chains have been using them to move their goods, they put them under tighter and tighter control, and they start to look more and more like regular employees. And so the settlement was about whether or not this group of truck drivers were actually employees rather than independent contractors. Because if you're an employee, it means you're covered by minimum wage laws, overtime laws, all anti-discrimination laws, all that stuff. So it's a big deal that they settled this. It's a $10 million settlement. It means that all these workers are going to get a big chunk of change. But the real significance of it is this, that the Teamsters union has been trying to organize truckers in the Port of Los Angeles for years. And the biggest impediment to organizing them has been the fact that legally, the government treated these people, most of these drivers, as owner operators or as independent contractors. The fact that we got this settlement in this major wage and hour case, recognizing the fact that this group of workers are employees, is the next important step in the process of solidly unionizing truckers in the Port of Los Angeles. And when
mm.
that happens, that's gonna really be transformative. That's gonna mean
Right.
a major, all of a sudden, the Teamsters Union is going to control a major artery of, the distribution of goods all over the United States in a way that hasn't happened since, maybe the 1950s. If when they accomplish that, it will be a huge step forward. But this is it's a process, right? And this winning this or settling this lawsuit was a big step in the right direction.
Right. That that opens up a lot in my mind as working as a food uh service worker in the hospitals. You could see the impact of the shortage all the time. Yeah, I mean, God, yesterday, half the things that were ordered on certain patients' trays, we couldn't even give them. We were running
Oh
out of
yeah.
everything. It's real, and it's been going on for a while now. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, there's something bigger than this. Why is it a shortage like this? Because it's never been like this, you know. And that is like huge. That's going to be a turnaround.
Yeah.
If and for if the Teamsters are able to like get that back and unionize all these truck drivers, that is going to be a big turnaround because it's felt. It's definitely felt. Um, they're literally trying different products, different name brands and stuff, and it's just we keep running out on everything. And it's a toll because it's not only we're running out of things, we're also low staff too.
Right.
We're
That's
also
right. You're trying
having
to make do with less goods and less workers.
right. So it just becomes even more stressful just even working there. I've been pulling my hair for the last three
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah, it's a bad situation. I mean, I think most of us have seen it at least to some extent. You go into a supermarket, or I was actually in a CVS drugstore this morning, and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, now instead of you remember how they have always had the baby formula locked up, right?
Right.
That's like, oh boy, we got to make sure people don't shoplift baby formula. Now, uh, batteries, all kinds of stuff in the CVS locked up so that you have to have somebody in the store has to like unlock it so that you can buy a package of AA batteries, right?
Oh wow.
Uh, and at the same time, the CVS and I just noticed this. This is like such a weird thing. The CVS has eliminated grocery carts and hand carts,
Mm,
and so they basically have made it really, really difficult for people to shop at the same time that the goods on the shelves are less and less. And I'm
yes.
looking through there. I'm like, picking up, toothpaste and mouthwash and a few other things. And I'm like, boy, the name brands are shrinking. I noticed the amount of space that some of these kinds of items they're taking on the shelves are getting smaller. They're actually reorganizing their store to adjust to the fact that there are shortages,
Right.
which means to me CVS is one of the biggest of the drugstore and prescription drug and convenience store chains. Means to me that they know something. If they're actually reorganizing their store around the fact that there are going to be shortages of products, that means that this isn't a short-term thing.
Yes.
It's not just that we don't have enough truckers unloading trucks.
Right.
It's that there's a production problem. And I think we're going to be I think in the immediate future, we're going to be looking at more shortages. I think we're going to be looking at some serious inflation, which is going to really scare people because,
Yes.
damn, shit already costs too much.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, just the essentials of life already cost too much, and they're going to cost more. And it's going to mean, I noticed that in the uh, we go back and forth, right?
Hmm.
We get in my house, we go to an Asian-owned produce store, a produce market, to get our produce whenever we can, because that's the best place to like save money because they don't have big displays. It's not like a supermarket where they spend tons of money on advertising. On the other hand, sometimes we're like, gee, we'd really like to get some like really, really nice fruit. So then we go to the Whole Foods. And as I'm going back and forth between these two different places, I start noticing, gee, like the quality and the price in the Asian market is going down, and the quality and the quality is going down in the Whole Foods as well, but the prices are going up.
Wow.
Um, there's something going on as far as food supplies, as far as in terms of how agriculture is being distributed. And I think we're going to see I think this winter we're going to see some serious price increases, serious shortages, generally speaking, inflation. And the most important thing, the bosses are going to blame it on us. They're going to say the problem is that people aren't willing to work for $12 an hour, or in some parts of the country, $7.35 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage. They say people aren't willing to work for less, and look what's happened. The prices are going up and there's not enough stuff on the shelves, et cetera. Like, no, that's not the problem. The problem is that at the same time that we're saying we want decent wages and better working conditions, and workers are unionizing in order to do that, the bosses are saying, yeah, okay, well, if you force us to do that, maybe we're going to do it, but there's no way we're going to take a cut in our profits. You know that we have to get as big a piece of the pie as we ever got. You know, we have to make as big a profit as we ever did. So maybe that's going to mean that prices are going to go up. And, you know, it's not a problem for them, right? It's just a problem for us.
Right. And, you know, just thinking back on like Walmart, I went grocery shopping. Walmart. Walmart has a very big supermarket here in New Haven. There's nothing there. Like, I had to scramble around to find things. There's no plastic bags neither. Where you have to bring your own bags. I saw a few customers that were asking, hey, where are the bags? Like, they were like so shocked. They're like, well, we ran out of bags. We don't have bags. And they're like, what? How? Like it was a real thing. Like, I was so shocked to hear that too. And I was like, wow, it's really happening. This is exactly what we socialists been talking about from the get-go.
Right.
Since the beginning with the United States. It's going to get bad. And they're going, like you said, they're going to literally blame the workers. They're not even going to take accountability. I mean, look at the governor of Connecticut, Lamont, trying to get people to get vaccinated, and if they don't get vaccinated, they're going to get terminated. My job has already fired a few people quietly for not wanting to vaccinate. I've heard about a pastor that works there, and he didn't want to get vaccinated for religious reasons, but he definitely has immunization. He's been around it. He's been helping out, and they quietly asked him to leave. New York, they're talking about 70,000 healthcare workers that they're talking about replacing with the state, with freaking National Guard, and they're like, oh, this is God's plan. God want us to do this. That lady is crazy. That lady is batshit crazy. She's like, well, I think she said she had like she has like a necklace of a vaccine on her neck or something like that. I don't know. It's getting really weird, Peter.
Yeah. Well, here's the story. You probably have heard me tell this story before, but I tell it every chance I get because I think it's really important. Back in around 1986, 1987. So, you know, long time ago now, right? But around 86 or 87, there was a recession. 87, and I remember that Wall Street Journal newspaper ran this article. I happened to be on a plane, and somebody had left a copy. I don't ordinarily read the Wall Street Journal, right? But there was a copy of it there, and I'm looking through this. And this article, and the article is telling me about. Now, this is 1987. The article is about how there was this big conference of major business leaders in the United States, mostly like manufacturing sector business leaders, and this was the theme of the conference. It was that, you know, up until now, American corporations have been putting out the message that the benefit of capitalism is that eventually everyone all over the world is going to raise their wages and their living standards because of the availability of American technology and American products. And so, you know, eventually, no matter where you are, whether you're in Indonesia or in South Africa or in Venezuela, you know, you're going to have the benefits of American capitalism because your standard of living is going to improve, and the way the labor standards, the wages are going to go up. Everyone's going to be happy, right? That was always the message of American capitalism from the end of World War II, right up until Reagan came into office in 1980. But in 87, they had this business conference, and they said, from now on, we have to refocus. Instead of talking about how we're going to raise the standards in the developing countries, we have to start getting American workers accustomed to the idea that their standards are going to go down to the level of these developing countries. And it's been up until now, it's been a gradual process. But every major recession that's taken place has pushed our labor standards down. It's pushed our standards of living down, and we never actually recover from them. There's a layer at the top that makes a lot of money off of the recession. They come out of them, with more money and more control, more power than ever. But the great majority of workers in the United States, every recession, it pushes us down, and we never quite get back to where we were before. And I see this in my job because, as a labor lawyer, because when I started practicing law, some 26 years ago, when I started practicing, I would get calls from people. I just got fired from my job after working for my employer for like 20 years. And then after a while, it was like, I just got fired from my job where I've been working for my employer for 10 years. Now, somebody calls me up and says they've been working for somebody for 5 years. I'm like, wow, you've been there for a long time.
Right.
People used to work for an employer for a lifetime. Now, if they can hold a job with the same employer for 5 years, that's a big deal.
Right.
And that's part of this process of pushing the labor standards down and pushing the standard of living down for people to the point where there's constant insecurity on the job. You never know whether you're going to have a job from one day to the next. The boss can fire you at any time for any reason at all and get away with it. They're going to make people compete for scraps for how little are you willing to work for? How much abuse are you willing to take on the job? That's going to determine, whether or not you have a job. And you're right. I mean, we've talked about this as socialists. We talked about this forever. But this last, 30 or so years, things have taken a decisive turn in this direction in the United States, in a place where, basically imperialism allowed capitalists in this country to give us a little bit more privilege, especially white people, white men, a little bit more privilege, a little bit higher wages, a little bit more job security, a little bit better benefits, and all of that is going away. We're en route right now to a American workplace that really doesn't look all that much different from any number of developing countries. That's what that's their long-term plan. Get as much work for as little as possible, automate as much of it as they possibly can, dispense with our work as much as they possibly can.
Right.
And of course, the problem is they do that, but then they've got to have somebody to sell products to, right?
Yeah.
So who are they going to sell products to? If we can't afford to buy them, who are they going to sell products to, right?
Right.
So it's a contradiction. Contradiction of capitalism.
It is. And the more we get deeper to the rabbit hole, like what's been happening with the uprise as of right now is just going to get bigger and bigger. And the Western media is ignoring it as much as they can. And it's going to get to the point that they can't ignore it, and they're going to have no choice but to say something about it. And they're probably going to say something idiotic, like, something elitist. And then they're going to get destroyed for being elitist and not changing their opinions ever. I just think it's really interesting. And you see the homelessness, for instance, that's going on, and a lot of people are now making. You see exactly like where the money is going. You can find out that people are making money like six figures just to say that their job is to eradicate homelessness, but they don't eradicate.
Oh yeah. Right, because they'd be putting themselves out of a job if they did that.
Right, exactly. And it's like what the issue is, but capitalism just can't help you solve it at all.
Yeah.
The system itself is rigged to the point that, okay, we can put money towards a cause, but that doesn't mean that we're going to fix this cause. That doesn't mean we're going to actually give a solution to the cause. But what the solution is now, But Venice Beach used to be such a very nice place, and now there's nobody. Now there's people there that are in tents and they're doing drugs. It's all drugs. Everybody's on drugs. That's what I heard about from this podcast from this guy on freaking Joe Rogan was talking about. Oh, I talked to cops. I talked to all these people, and they told me that it's not the stories that they lost their jobs and their kids got put into the system because they couldn't help them or provide for them and stuff. It's the drugs. Everybody there is on drugs. And yes, maybe there are people that are on drugs, but where are the systems that help those people that are on drugs?
Right.
We just keep blaming everybody for their actions instead of trying to actually give a solution so they don't have to go to that route. Like there's no
See, when
solution.
you're homeless and you're taking drugs, then that makes you a drug addict. If you're rich
Right.
and you're taking drugs, that means you're on vacation.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
but I mean, they don't bother to ask. Like, okay, I have no doubt at all that in a lot of these big homeless camps at Los Angeles and Portland and Seattle, where this has been like and it become a really really enormous factor in the lack of affordable housing. And of course, we see it on this coast as well. But uh, I have no doubt that in these communities, um, the use of drugs and alcohol is rampant. Why
Yep.
wouldn't it be? People are
Exactly.
living on the freaking street. What do you expect them to do? I mean, how miserable does somebody have to be before somebody says, "Hey, you know what? I understand why somebody might want to do drugs." You know,
Exactly.
how much how much physical pain do they have to be in because they can't afford to see a doctor? They say,
Right.
"You know what? I'm going to get some weed. I'm going to get something that's going to make me feel better." How much pain do they have to be in before somebody says, "Hey, I understand why it is that you want to do this"?
Mm.
So, I mean, even to the extent that that's true, what does it really reflect? What it reflects is we live in a society that has no problem with putting thousands of people, including families, including small children, onto the street, making them live homeless, and then blaming them for being homeless, as if somehow they had a choice in the matter, as if somehow, there was like, I mean, look, y'all are in New Haven, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Hartford is getting bad, but New Haven, forget about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I read these stories about like, oh, they're going to build an apartment complex and they're going to convert some old industrial building into apartments in New Haven. And the first thing I think of is like, okay, what's that going to look like? Like, not going to be any working people living in those apartments. I
Oh
can tell you
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
That's the rents that y'all are dealing with are totally out of control, and we're
Yeah.
seeing it here too. Downtown Hartford, through ever since really ever since the Reagan era, downtown Hartford has been like anybody who visits there on a weekend. It's like a desert. Like there's nothing. There's nothing there. They basically uprooted all of the communities that existed in that area and in order to build office buildings and parking lots, they took out all the old retail businesses, when they failed. And everything that's in downtown Hartford exists in order to serve the people who work in office buildings during the week, 9 to 5.
Mm.
So when you go into downtown Hartford on the weekend, the place is empty. And now it's starting to change, but the way it's changing is that they're building apartments and they're creating more and more apartments for people who have money. It's like going to be like a new urban elite. And they're not building housing in order to deal with the problem of homelessness, just the opposite. They're basically building housing so that they can lure people in from their luxury housing in the suburbs to luxury housing in urban areas. And
Yeah.
it's not about creating more housing for people. It's actually about creating less housing for people.
No, there's a cause and effect to everything that we do in this world. That's just the most scientifically proven statement on the planet. There's a cause and effect to everything that we do. I see that. Do you see that in New Haven strongly? Downtown New Haven is lit up with mad luxury homes everywhere. You look
Mm-hmm.
online to try to see what these prices are going to be because our board of alders told us, and y'all lied. Sorry, board of alders, but you fucking lied. You told us that it was going to be mixed income housing, and it wasn't fucking mixed income housing at all. What is mixed income housing when the lowest rate of fucking rent there is $1,300, and the highest is about $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
$1,300 would get you a nice, decent studio apartment. But if you got a family and a kid, you need like a 3 bedroom, 2 bedroom. You better have $3,000 to dish out every single month. Um, I walked past one of those neighborhoods because they're growing, and I was flyering and stuff, and I ended up at one of the nice apartment complexes by accident. And the lady saw me, white lady. She walked by, but she moved to the other side of the street, and then she went back to the same side of the street when she got past me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just like, oh yeah, here we go, New Haven.
Yeah, yeah.
What is
And
the cost
everything that goes with it,
effectiveness
right?
though? Like,
You
are
know,
we going to like force? Do we need to have like a renters union in a way to force these development people to have lower prices? Are we going to have to force them to lower price their things? Like how can we what can be the way to like fix this type of like tax not tax rent rate that's so high and to make it be decreased?
yeah, it's funny because I've been thinking about this recently because I've heard a lot of stories. You know, New Britain is another working class community in Connecticut where the downtown has traditionally, for many years, has been very poor. There's been a lot of homeless folks, a lot of, really, really low quality housing, really not fit for human beings.
Mm.
And where all of a sudden they're starting to rehab these buildings and they're rehabbing them into luxury apartments. And I people have talked about it in New Britain. They've talked about it in Hartford. Like I said, I know that New Haven, this has been a problem for a long time. Stanford, the real estate, the rents in Stanford, like it's like in New York City,
Oh, Stanford. Oh, yeah,
totally out of control.
yeah.
But it really has made me think. There was a time back, after World War II, there was a time when people figured out a solution to this problem, and it's
Hmm.
one that has really unraveled over the years. That's rent control. New York City at one point in time had rent control that prevented landlords from raising the rent above a certain amount per year, and the result was it's wild because you talk to folks who have lived in New York City for like a really long time. I know people who have apartments, folks like my age or older, folks who have apartments in New York City that they pay like these incredibly low rents because they're still subject to rent control. In most places, they've lifted them, but there are still some places where they haven't. So folks we're able to get housing, good quality housing at decent rates because the landlords were legally prevented from raising the rents. And and I don't know. I think we have to take a really serious look at that again. If there's one thing that makes the business and industry folks scream bloody murder, it's the idea of two things, right? One is workers organizing unions, and the other is people organizing for rent control. Those are, I think, their two biggest fears, because they know that the degree of power that represents in a city, to be able for workers to have the power to be able to regulate the housing market, so that the real estate owners can't extort these huge profits, and so that people actually can afford a decent place to live. That's a huge amount of power, and it's exactly the sort of thing that they are terrified that we might have. Just like right now, they're terrified that there are all these work stoppages and union organizing drives and strikes and everything else. They're terrified of that, but it might be the case. I mean, frankly, during a time that I've been an activist, most of that time we never had that degree of power.
Mm.
So every once in a while, you see in a community for some period of time, a movement would develop, and it would have some momentum to it, and it would bring a lot of people into its orbit, and it would make some really serious demands on the system, and it would extract some concessions. But it was always very piecemeal. Like, it might happen in New Haven, but not in Hartford. It might happen in Boston, but not in New York. Now, this is more and more, people are beginning to recognize that the things they're dealing with on the job, the things they're dealing with in the housing market, the problems that they're dealing with when it comes to healthcare, the conditions of our schools, these are common problems. These aren't problems that like, oh yeah, I heard that people in some other part of the country have to deal with this. Everybody's dealing with it. And everybody knows that everybody is dealing with it. And I think that's really the key. The point at which we start to look at things and say, you know what, we actually all have the same problem. We all have the same problem, which is, generally speaking, is that there is a group of people in our society who make huge amounts of money and huge profits. And to make those profits, they will subject us to any degree of whether it's poor working standards or poor living conditions, or homelessness. They will subject us to any degree of pain and suffering, as long as it keeps their profit margins up. And so we have to be resolute about it. We have to approach it from the point of view that this really is a class struggle, that it's working class people against another group of people, a group of rich people in our country, a group of capitalists, who have a fundamentally different set of interests than we do.
It's not Jeff Bezos.
Maybe they're nice people, maybe they're nice individual people, and you meet them and you shake hands with them and they're
Right.
polite, but their function in society is harmful to us. Their existence in society is harmful to us.
Right.
Their existence is driving us down and pulling us down. And we have to begin to look at it that way. This is really, it's like, look, it's not about you, rich guy, personally. Don't take it personal. We don't personally mind that you want to send your kids to ski in Switzerland this winter. Of course you want good things for your kids. Of course you want to drive a nice car. Of course you want to have a big house. If I had tons of money, I would want to do those things too.
Right.
It's not you personally. It's that you are part of a system that, in order for you to have those things, we have to hurt. We have to bleed for them. And we're done bleeding for you. That's just it. We're just done with that shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. Just thinking about, like, I was watching a show about I think it was American Horror Story, and they reenact what happened to the czars. And my friend was talking about, damn, they really did that to them. I was like, you need to realize those people, those kids that are part of that family, they got executed because the wealth, the power they all held was in the result of thousands of people starving to death and dying.
Yeah.
And yeah, it looks so sad the way that they're showing it. Yeah, it is sad. They're sad. They were like 17, 20 years old getting massacred by the revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks, but their existence didn't help. Their existence, their father's power didn't help. They just struck poverty. They just gave out nothing but pain and suffering to their own people, just so they can have the wealth, the power. We're oppressed people. We're so easy to humanize anyone. We're so easy to do that. But you can't humanize blood-sucking capitalists. You just can't. And I'm probably going to get some flack for that, but it's the truth. It's the truth. Jeff Bezos not going to give a damn about you humanizing him. He got all this damn money. He's not going to care. He's going to be good.
When you hear that, in the midst of the pandemic last year, big news story was people are moving out of New York City. Well, first of all, if you live in Manhattan, you got some serious cash.
Yeah.
There are no poor people left living in Manhattan. I mean, those tiny little enclaves, tiny little neighborhoods where people are living like, way too many people in the same apartment.
Right.
But basically, people were like, yeah, people are moving out of New York City. And like, yeah, what that means is rich people are moving out of New York City because they own property that's worth a lot of money and they can sell for a lot of money, and they can move anywhere they want and buy property for a lot of money. So the story was, yeah, in parts of rural Connecticut and New Jersey and upstate New York, all these rich folks are going to leave New York City and they're going to buy houses out in these more remote areas because of the pandemic, because they're afraid that things are going to get bad. And when you see that, you suddenly realize, like I don't have a choice about where I live. Like, realistically, if I'm getting my wife and I have a mortgage on a tiny little house, right?
Mhm.
And we like our house, but it's not like we really have a big choice about where to live. I
Right.
mean, yeah, we could sell that house and move someplace else. The place we'd have to move to would be exactly like the place we're living in right now. It's not like we're going to move out to the country somewhere. It's not like we're going to, it's not like we could live in New York City if we wanted to. Our ability to move from one place to the other is extremely limited. So when you hear a story about people leaving New York to buy real estate someplace else, what you're hearing is like, yeah, this is what rich people are doing right now. They have the freedom to do that. We do not have the freedom to do that. And at every,
But they'll also tell you we're all in this together. But don't be
absolutely, yeah,
glass New York.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's like, yeah, we're all in this fight together against the pandemic. But the difference is that they're the generals and we're the people who are like on the front lines dying.
Right.
And that's, like, are we all in it together? Well, yeah, I guess in a certain sense you could say we are. They have the resources that could make life easier for us, but they're not going to give it to us. And on the other hand, they're counting on us to do the things that are necessary in order to continue to keep them in the lifestyles that they're accustomed to. I was thinking, when you were saying this, Jamar, a minute ago about rich people and poor people, and the fact that oppressed people have been extremely forgiving, excessively forgiving, if anything, right? There are two things I think about when you mention that. There are kind of two things that pop in my head at the same time, and one of them, and I think this is something that a lot of like white working class people really need to hear. Like they really need to hear this.
Oh,
that there is that there's this kind of popular myth that exists in white culture. And it's perpetuated by the media all the time. Like whenever they do stories, like for example, do a story about the Black Panther Party, right? And the way they present it is like the Black Panther Party hated white people. They do a story about the Muslim Americans, but they hate white people. They do a story about about crime in urban neighborhoods, and they make it sound like, well, the real problem is if you're white and you happen to go there, something bad might happen to you. And as an activist, as somebody who has like worked on issues involving things like police brutality and homelessness and poverty for the last 40 years, the one thing that I've experienced is that no one in this country has been more forgiving and more like introspective about the problems that people have than oppressed communities. I think about the number of conversations I've had with other Black workers who are like telling me, yeah, you know what, I recognize the fact that I have prejudices, because everybody does. And so I try to take that into account when I'm dealing with white people. Like, you don't find white people with that kind of insight for the most part. People are looking at it from the point of view of like, well, yeah, sure, since I treat people badly based on their skin color, I kind of assume they're going to treat me badly as well. So I think that's one piece of sort of recognizing where we are in society right now, which is that white working people, people who have traditionally been privileged, really need to get a grip, and they need to look at the fact that the things that we're complaining about, the things that we justifiably are angry about, are things that Black and Latin and Native people in this country have had to deal with for like the last couple of centuries. And if you want to find out like who knows about this stuff, I mean, that's one of the reasons to look at groups like the Black Panther Party, right? Because
Right.
the Black Panther Party reflected the knowledge and understanding that was accumulated through like several centuries of Black people living in slavery in the United States and dealing with Jim Crow and dealing with racism. All that experience was distilled in the program of the Black Panther Party.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we want to figure out if in the process of feeling our like, gee, I really thought I was going to have it good. I thought my kids were going to go to college. I thought that I would have a good retirement. I thought I would have a secure job. I can't figure out why we can't afford, treatment for my kids' cancer. In the midst of all that turmoil, what people ought to be thinking about is, yeah, you know what? There are a lot of folks in this country who have always had to deal with this. And they've developed ways of dealing with this problem. They've developed ways of organizing. They have given us examples to follow. And it's up to us to have the wisdom to say, hey, you know what? These examples, whether it was like sharecroppers organizing in Mississippi in the 1930s, or the Black Panthers, or any of the numerous other, the Million Man March, any of the times that oppressed people have demonstrated, like flexed their muscles and demonstrated like, you know what, we're not going to put up with this anymore.
Right.
That's what we should be learning from. And we have to like shed this idea that somehow you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to get together with a bunch of my white friends and we're going to change the world. And we're not interested in the fact that other people have tried this before, that other people have had these same struggles. We're going to come up with our own solutions to it. It doesn't work that way. Oppressed people in the United States are a repository of all of the information that's needed about, about how we got to where we are and how we can get out of the situation that we're in right now. And leadership from oppressed communities is like got to be at the center of everything that we do politically.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's one piece of it. That's one piece of understanding the personal aspect of it. The other piece of the personal aspect of it, like we were talking about before, is this business that is that folks are really, really super concerned about the feelings of rich white people. People who live lives that really are predatory on us. They're like vampires, really. They're like social vampires. They have the things they have by taking them away from us. And we stand around worrying about whether their feelings are going to get hurt, or whether we're being sufficiently nice to them.
Right. It gets on my nerves. For instance,
we have to, right? Right, and so we have to, and you mentioned this before we came on, and when we chatted yesterday, that we have to be sure and talk about Colin Powell, right?
Yes.
Because right now that's like the number one. It's like a perfect example of what we're talking about. Now, on the one hand, I know folks who admired Colin Powell because of the fact that he's an African American man who achieved status in this country that no person of color ever had, and especially some folks I know, some Black veterans that I know, I respect the fact that that's part of their thinking. But you take a step back from that, and you say, okay, what are we really talking about here? This is a guy who, in his autobiography, described in glowing terms the process that he used as serving in the military in Vietnam, burning villages, like burning down villages, If people believe that if the U.S. military believed that these villages were infested with people who were basically patriots, who supported the revolutionary forces in Vietnam, they would just go in and burn the village down. And invaders from another country, invaders from the United States, go into rural parts of Vietnam and they proceed to terrorize people. They shoot people, they imprison people, they burn their villages down. They torture them. And Colin Powell was a part of that. He was one of the people who helped to make that possible. And he rose up through the ranks because of the fact that he was willing to do those things.
Yep.
And he ultimately achieved the position that he did in our society because of, frankly, how good he was at ordering people to kill other people for the benefit of capitalism. And so there are folks who are like, yeah, you can't say bad things about dead people. Well, I'm not particularly invested in the idea of saying bad things about dead people. I am invested in telling the truth about people.
Exactly.
As far as I'm concerned, the world would be a better place if we could forget that Colin Powell ever existed. I'm not interested in celebrating the fact that he's dead, but I am interested in making sure that people know that because he lived the way he did, because of the choices that he made, he contributed to the deaths of literally millions of people, men, women, and children, civilian, not just military people, but civilians. In Iraq, 1 million people died because Colin Powell stood up at the United Nations and said, you know what? We have proof that the Iraqi government is hiding weapons of mass destruction.
Yep.
He got up and he made that speech. Yeah. Yep. He got up and he made that speech.
We can't just blame Bush.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I don't blame Colin Powell any more than I blame Bush or any number of other people. But if they're gonna tell us that we have to, if they're gonna tell us that it's important to be mindful of the fact that somebody has just died, then I'm gonna be like, yeah, okay, that's great. We should be mindful of the fact that the person who just died was responsible for the deaths of millions of people. Was involved in major war crimes over a course of decades. And we have to understand that doesn't mean that he didn't look nice in his uniform. It doesn't mean that he wasn't very polite and a nice person, and you could shake his hand and he would be you could have a nice chat with him about his family or whatever. It's not about who he was as a individual human being interacting with other individual human beings. It's that he made a decision to play a role in a system that systematically exterminates people who resist capitalism. Right. And his role was, he was one of the executioners. He was one of the people, not just one of the executioners. He was like the head executioner, right? The guy who, on behalf of capitalism, goes in and says to everyone under him, okay, there's the enemy, go and kill them. That's not something that.
So long?
What's that?
Why do imperialists outlive revolutionaries?
Well, it's like vampires, right? I mean, right, in the vampire movies, vampires like live for centuries because they live off of the life essence of other human beings, right? They live out far beyond their natural lifespan because of that. And what is capitalism but a system that takes the life essence of the vast majority of people on this planet, not just in this country, the overwhelming majority of people on this planet. It takes their life essence and it turns it into the wealth that keeps a tiny group of people alive, far beyond the time when they should have been kicked to the dustbin of history.
Right. It's interesting. It's because I was thinking, because I wrote a song called "Those Capitalists Are Vampires" back in 2019, and it's so true.
Absolutely, it's still the best comparison. It's still the best comparison that anybody can make.
It's sad, and that's the reason why I stayed quiet about the whole Colin Powell thing and just post a article, because I really didn't have time to argue with people about defending a war criminal. Like
Yeah.
he does not deserve my time.
Yeah.
I
No,
dealt
and
with it already with Bush Senior because I
yeah.
went in on Bush Senior and people were messaging me, respect the family, respect the war criminal family. Yeah, whatever.
Well, but I will say this though, that that's one of the things about like how we as socialists try to think about these kinds of issues, not just about
Right,
the reality, the truthfulness of them, but also about how we communicate them to other people. I mean,
right,
I go onto social media and I see that, like with respect to Colin Powell, that there are people who are like, yeah, I want to dance on his grave.
word.
I want to celebrate the fact that he's dead. And so it invites all these really, really angry responses.
Hmm.
But as socialists, we ought to be able to look at this and think, okay, we know that people have these wrong ideas. So
Hmm.
how do we, what would be the most effective way to challenge these wrong ideas? And when I see these, famous imperialists who have passed, the presidents and generals and people like that, when they die and they're in the news, to me, it's not about like, let's celebrate the fact that they died. It's that let's point out on the occasion of their death what this person was responsible for,
Mm.
so that the folks who we're talking to may not necessarily have that visceral reaction of like, oh yeah, no, you can't say bad things about dead people, but that it might actually make them think for a minute about, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to mourn the fact that this guy died, maybe I have to actually deal with like the reality of what he did while he was alive. Um, you
Exactly.
know, um, so somebody said about Colin Powell that, the thing is, he later on said that he regretted, being responsible for playing the role he did with the Iraq War. So
That's
you know
good.
what? Yeah, it's like that's great. That's really, really good. Here's what I would have at the very, very minimum. Here's what had to have happened. Okay, like if Colin Powell had said at some point in time after the Iraq War, if he had publicly said, you know what, I reviewed the events that I was involved in, and I've come to realize that what I did was wrong. What I did was profoundly wrong. I was responsible for the deaths of many, many good people, who never did anything to harm me or the American people. And because I recognize that, and because I want to take responsibility for it, I am giving up my military post. I am giving up all the honorariums. I want to just spend the rest of my life trying to think about how I can make up for the fact that I committed these horrible crimes.
Right.
That's a meaningful apology. That's
Like Jimmy Carter. He's kind of doing that. He's building
yeah, no,
houses
that's
for
right.
homeless people.
Yep. Yeah,
He's
that's
trying.
that's right. He's recognized the fact that he was in the power structure and he played a role and he was part of the machine that was responsible for a lot of really bad stuff.
He
Um,
defended North Korea as well too back in the 90s about
yep.
talking about the sanctions and all that stuff. So there's
And
examples, people.
it actually, that's right. I mean, it's not impossible. What we're asking for isn't crazy. We're asking for the same things that society constantly asks of people who have committed crimes, right?
Right.
Um, I got a call the other day from a potential client who got fired from the first job that she had since she got out of jail. She's been in jail for a couple of decades. And she left and she finished her sentence and she went out into the community and she got a job. And, she's telling me, like, I don't know this. Like, she's like, it's really hard to get a job when
Mm,
you've been in jail for, a long time. I said,
mm,
seriously, no kidding. A lot of employers won't even talk to you. She finally gets this job and she has the job for like 4 months because she's constantly being sexually harassed on the job and really being just treated like crap. And she speaks up and she gets fired for it.
wow.
And I look at that and I think, here's somebody who paid a really high price for whatever bad thing they did. It's not up to me to say whether that's the penalty that she should have had to pay. The fact is, she paid an enormous price for the things that she did, and she's still paying for it.
Mm,
And she's going to be paying for it the rest of her life. And when people in power make mistakes, somehow we never say, you know what, they should have to pay the same way that we pay.
Right.
You know, when I make if I'm working in a job and I make a really serious mistake and I get fired for it, that's a huge penalty for me. If I break the law and I go to jail for it, that's a huge penalty. We never seem to expect those penalties for the people who have committed crimes on behalf of the ruling class in the United States. That's why I say I'm not necessarily, I don't feel the need to tell people that I would dance on Colin Powell's grave. I do feel the need to say, you know what? If he really regretted what he did, he should have taken responsibility for it publicly. He should have denounced it. And he should have said, I'm no longer going to be part of this system that victimized people in this way, because I've come to realize that it's wrong. And if you haven't done that, if they don't do that, they haven't been held accountable. They haven't taken responsibility, and they can't, from my perspective at least, they cannot be forgiven for something that they've never apologized for.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Peter Goselin. That was so beautifully explained. I'm going to definitely chop up this segment and add that in right before this episode drop, definitely, so people can get a full understanding, because it's so true. You know what I mean? We are literally brainwashed to believe and want to be more accepting of people that are of the higher class, or the oligarchs, the imperialists, but we have no compassion for those who are not doing as well as we are. The American tradition. And as much as people would say that that's not true, you see their true character, and then in order for us to educate them on it, we have to make the right ways of doing it, to be dumbed down for them so they can understand. And it's not saying dumbed down as in an assaulting way. No, there's like for instance,
break it down to basics.
Propaganda. Exactly. Not all propaganda is bad. There's good propaganda and there's bad propaganda. You break it down to basics, that's like propaganda. You're able to give them something simple that they can grab and hold on to, and it will educate them. You know what I mean?
And people develop their consciousness based on those bits and pieces. Right. You start out by recognizing that, well, gee, maybe the United States, maybe the people who are responsible for killing people, 1 million people in Iraq, maybe they didn't do that to defend us. Right. Maybe they did it for some other reason. That's a starting. Right. People know that. There's a good reason for them to know it. The information is available. There's no reason. It's not a secret. It's not being hidden from them. It's an uncomfortable truth that they have to deal with. Right. And I don't want to overload them. I don't want to hit them with something that they can't deal with. But I do want them to start thinking about these fundamental truths, that someone who's committed a crime, who has never apologized for that crime, doesn't deserve to be forgiven for that crime.
Right. And then, and people, and it's so important to explain what an actual apology will really mean, because people would take, oh, well, he said in front of thousands of people, like Obama, for instance. I'll bring up Obama real quick. What happened in Syria? He was like, oh, a few years later, that wasn't the right decision to make at the time. I should have never have done that. That's not really an apology. I'm just saying, I should have did something else.
No, you know what? Here's the thing. If you walked out of a store, if you walked into the supermarket and you walked out of the store and you had shoved a bunch of steaks and shit into your pockets and you didn't pay for them and they arrested you and you had to appear in front of the judge, if you appeared in front of the judge and said, Your Honor, I recognize that it was a mistake for me to do that. And that was the extent of it. I recognize that it was a mistake to do that. I regret that now. I wish that I hadn't done it. The judge is not going to be impressed. The judge is not going to say, wow, here's somebody who's really seriously repented for the things that they have done. Right. They're going to say, hey, so what you're telling me is you regret the fact that now everybody knows that you did something that was wrong,
Right.
and that you might very well end up paying some kind of penalty for it.
Right.
And that's not enough. That's not taking responsibility for your actions. That's just regretting the fact that you got caught.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's all that is. The information came out. Your name was on it. You and Hillary, and now y'all just like. Ugh. I mean, she literally was on camera rejoicing the murder of Gaddafi, like on camera. She's like, "Yes, we got him," and all that ish. Like, come on, man. Like,
The one thing that the thing we keep on, when it comes to, I think especially when it comes to Libya, the story that just sticks in everyone's minds and that no one is able to forget. Anyone who's acting in good faith and actually wants to understand like what happened. The one thing that we know for an absolute truth is that prior to the U.S. intervention, Libya was a prosperous country with a single unified government that provided a high degree of social services and support for its people. I can't say whether it was, I don't think it was the best country on earth. I don't think that the people were the freest people on earth. I don't think that the policies of the Gaddafi government were the best possible policies. But I do know that they didn't have slave markets then, and they have slave markets now as a direct result of what the United States did. That's all I really, really need to know. There are some direct consequences of those actions that are horrendous. And anyone who's acting in good faith, anyone who's making an honest inquiry, has to deal with the fact that U.S. intervention in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, and all these places has had horrendous outcomes. It doesn't make any difference how well it doesn't make, even if we want to believe that their intentions were good, and personally I don't, but even if we wanted to believe that their intentions were good, even if we wanted to believe that they thought they were doing the right thing, history has proven that they were wrong.
Right.
And they have to take responsibility for that. And if they don't take responsibility for it, what it tells us is they're simply going to continue to do it. They're going to do it again.
Yep. And Afghanistan is a huge example of that.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely.
And Peter, there's so much more we could talk about. I don't want to take up more of your time. I'm not going to pull the Joe Rogan and have like 4-hour long podcasts and stuff. One day, but not today.
Right.
But God, there's just so much to impact to talk about on here. Definitely going to try to like swing my ways around the demonetization and stuff. Spotify has been really good about that. Shouts out to Spotify for helping me out. They don't really demonetize you for anything, really. So yeah, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Do you have any final words that you'd like to give a message out to the viewers? We had such a great conversation, talking about so many different issues that relate to the working class.
I really, really enjoy, this is the second time I've done your podcast with you, and I really enjoy it because I feel like it's a really great opportunity to have a public discussion about some really critical issues, in ways that, very often we just don't have the opportunity to do that. So props to you for podcast. You're doing such a great job. I'm really glad to be able to contribute to it a little bit. And I guess to our listening audience, I guess what I would say is this, the world is changing. We can see today more than ever that all roads lead to socialism. Every path of national development and every international development that's positive, that points towards towards any kind of a future for the people on this planet, is rooted in socialism. It doesn't make any difference whether it's the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, or whether it's the Cuban Revolution, or the Chinese Revolution, the Vietnamese Revolution, These have taken a lot of different forms. People are involved in a lot of different ways of struggling, but at the end of it, we all understand now we are moving in the direction of the final emancipation of the working class. The working class becomes the class that rules the planet. The centuries and centuries of human existence in which there was a parasitic, vampire-like class that extracted the life essence of the rest of humanity in order to exist. Those days are coming to an end, and for the well-being of the human race and for the well-being of the planet, we have to do everything possible to speed their demise.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.
You have a really good day. I'll talk to you later, my friend.
All right.
Collectively transforming community, peace in our human family, volume of unity, divine light shining individually, collectively transforming community, peace in our human family.
Growth as above, so below. Feel the pain in my soul, the red pill dissolved. Organized, no matter the cost. Politicians start wars, they don't fight, they send the poor. And nothing lasts forever as long as we stay together. Give hell to the masses, watch the unity rapture. This is for the kids and the culture. It's one love, one growth, one light, light warriors.